May of 2001, spring of my senior year of high school, just to make you all feel young. I was driving on Murphy Hill Road. It was a back country road that I took to get to one of my friend's house. And truth be told, it was a road that I probably should have wrecked on many times before, because there were several nights where I was running a little late for curfew, and I made what should have been the 20-minute trip in like 11 or 12 minutes because I didn't want to be late for curfew, because that came with consequences I didn't much care for. This particular night, however, my friend had to go to work, so I was coming home at 6 o'clock at night. I was not in a hurry. I was driving at a nice, leisurely pace. And then I hit the corner. Now, to understand everything that happens here, you need to know two things about Murphy Hill Road. Number one, it spans a township line, which means that different parts of the road are taken care of by different townships. In particular, the township line was precisely in the middle of a 90-degree left-hand corner coming around the road. The second thing you need to know is that when I say it was a backcountry road, I don't mean one of those asphalt roads with food potholes. I don't even mean one of those chip and seal roads. I mean a dirt road that they dumped loose gravel on occasionally to provide traction. So what happened to me on this particular May evening is, as I was coming home, Perry Township, the township where I live, had decided to lay fresh gravel on their portion of Murphy Hill Road. And so I come about 30-35 miles an hour around a left-hand corner, and my rear-wheel drive empty pickup truck hit freshly laid gravel. And I learned a valuable lesson. Loose gravel is almost as slick as black ice, maybe even slicker. And I began to fishtail and spin. Now, I'd like to think if that happened to me today, I've got a little more experience in the car in terms of knowing how to turn into the skid and knowing how to, like it's a standard pickup truck, you downshift and let the car slow itself. I was 18. I've been driving a car for about a year and a half, and I panicked. And I did the two things you should never do when your car starts to spin. I stomped on my brakes, and I jerked on the steering wheel, which only makes it worse. And so my Dodge Dakota climbed a 5-foot or so embankment to the left of the road. And then it stalled, because when you stomp on the brakes but not the clutch in a standard pickup truck, your engine shuts off. And when I stalled, I rolled back down the 5-foot incline, smashing the cab of my truck down about 12 inches and landing with such force that my rear tire exploded when I landed back on my tires on the road. It is the most scared I have ever been in my life. It lasted less than 10 seconds, and yet it affected me for weeks or months. Truth be told, I did not drive that road again for like 3 months. I went the long way. There's another road you could cut across and added like 10 minutes to your trip, but I was not driving back down that road again. And when I finally did, I was like 10 miles an hour going around the corner. The guy pulling the wagon with the Clydesdale horses was passing me, going around the corner, because that was not going to happen to me again. But that is the nature of fear, right? When something scares us, when something hurts us, our natural instinct is to do everything we can to avoid that situation again. I don't want to put myself in a spot where I have to deal with that thing that is that scary ever again. And so we can look at, basic phobias. How many of you are afraid of snakes? Anybody? A few of you? Okay, does anyone know someone who's afraid of snakes who also owns a pet snake? Of course not. That's ridiculous, right? If you're afraid of snakes, you would not keep a pet snake living in your house. How many of you are afraid of heights? Any of you afraid of heights also like to go rock climbing in your spare time? Or bungee jumping? Or hang gliding? Or, okay, you don't count because you're not smart.
I'm afraid of falling.
Afraid of falling.
Yeah.
When you are afraid of something, it is your natural inclination to do the things within your power to avoid the thing of which you are afraid. And it's not just the phobias, it's real life too. We started this series, Hurt and Healed, by talking about the different ways we've been hurt by people. The way people have gossiped about us, or broken our trust, or said they were going to be there and they weren't there. Or we've been open and vulnerable with them. And they've used that to manipulate us or hurt us or betray us. And so how do most of us respond? We build walls, right? I'm not letting anyone ever get that close again. Because the last time they got that close, they hurt me. I'm not going to trust anyone. I'm going to control everything in my life, because if I trust you, you're just going to let me down again. So I become a control freak because I can't afford to trust anyone. And we build these walls to protect ourselves because we know how bad it hurt the last time, and we are afraid of being hurt like that again. And so we build walls to protect ourselves. It happens with finances. I know anyone who's grown up in extreme poverty. Watch how careful they are with protecting their money. I still remember when my great-grandmother passed away. My great-grandmother was born and raised and lived through the Great Depression. And she knew what it was to have money in the bank and then not be able to get your money out of the bank. And to think that you were set for life and then not be able to feed your family. So my great-grandmother passed away. We found money in her house everywhere. We found it under the mattress. We found it in freezer bags in her deep freezer in the basement. We found it rolled up in wads in the ductwork of the house, hidden behind little cold air return grates, because she was afraid that she was someday going to have to go back to that time where she didn't know she was going to get to eat. She didn't know she was going to be able to live in her house anymore. And so she was doing everything in her power to make sure that never happened to her again. And that's the nature of fear, right? Fear leads us to try to avoid the thing we are afraid of. Now the problem, of course, is those of us who live long enough, we come to the realization that no matter how much you try to protect yourself, no matter how much you try to defend yourself, no matter how much you try to avoid those things, at some point, you got to drive around the scary corner again. At some point, you're going to be walking down the road and there's going to be a snake crawling out of the ditch. At some point, you're going to face financial hardships. Or at some point, someone's going to say something that hurts you again. That we can do everything in our power to avoid that, and yet still have to face the darkness of life. It's just part of the journey. And so the Bible, it presents a different alternative. The Bible does not speak of using fear to avoid the hard things, using fear to run away from the hard things. The Bible instead speaks of facing our fears with faith. That we will walk through the valley with faith. That we will not let fear deter us or keep us from following the shepherd, but we will face our fears with faith. We're in the 4th verse of Psalm 23. We've been walking through this for a while now. And when we come to Psalms 23:4, this is what it says. It says, "Even when I go through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." A little different probably than the version you memorized as a kid growing up, but it captures the meaning and the context really well. Even when I go through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, I love a couple of things about this. Number one, I love that David assumes the dark valley is coming. It doesn't say, well, if the valley comes, then I'll do this. Or maybe if perchance I have to deal with this situation. He says, even though or even when I go through the darkest valley. Because David knows from personal experience that if you follow your shepherd long enough, yes, there will be still waters, and yes, there will be green pastures, but there will also be dark valleys. I mean, you can trace David's life and see his own dark valleys. David, who was anointed to be the next king of Israel. David, who slayed the giant Goliath. David, who was a musician in the king's court and a general in the king's army, who suddenly one day had to run for his life. I think for a long time I would read those accounts of David running away from Saul and think, that must have been a miserable couple of months. You realize that most Christian scholarship estimates that he ran from Saul for between 6 and 10 years. 6 and 10 years. I mean, just look at the map here. Look at all of the places he ran, all of the towns he had to hide in, all of the places and journeys he had to make, including spending a good portion of that in the land of his enemy, the Philistines. Imagine 7, 8, 9 years of not being able to go home. 7, 8, 9 years of not being welcome in the country that you were going to be king of at some point. 7, 8, 9 years of the people that you used to fight and battle beside now hunting you, looking to kill you. 7 or 8 or 9 years of not knowing if the day was the day that you would wake up and your enemy would catch you and you would not see another tomorrow. Talk about a dark valley. And David says, even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. It wasn't David's only dark valley. We also know that he lost a child in childbirth. The child that was the product of his affair with Bathsheba. David pleaded for the life of that child. And still he died. David, whose son overthrew him and took his kingdom from him and hunted his own father. David walked through dark valleys. We walk through dark valleys. We have seasons of life where we feel like we're unloved, seasons of life where we feel like failures, seasons of life where we're dealing with grief, seasons of life where it feels like our world's falling apart. You cannot avoid the dark valley. You do get to choose how you walk through it, though. And David presents here the message that I will face my fears with faith. And so for David, he says, I will fear no danger, not because I'm brave, not because I'm strong, but because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Philip Keller, who wrote the book, A Shepherd's Look at the 23rd Psalm, and talks about this part of the psalm from a historical standpoint. And he basically describes it as part of the seasonal life of the sheep. That as the summer began to get hot, as it is for us now, the lower pastures were no longer good places to graze. It was too hot for the sheep. The grass was beginning to dry out. And so the good shepherds, the one who wanted the best for their sheep, would begin the journey up to the alpine meadows, the meadows and pastures that were on the mountainside above the tree line, where the temperatures were cooler, where the grass was a little greener, and you could make it through the heat of the summer up there. But that journey meant two things. Number one, it meant walking through some of the most dangerous terrain in the area. And then walking through these valleys where predators lie in wait. Walking through these valleys where thieves often lie in wait. These rocky areas along the river, because the water often is what cut the valley, that were a little more uneven, a little harder for the sheep to walk on. And the second thing it meant is the shepherd was on his own. He had left the farm, he had left the pen, he had left the barn to keep the animals safe at night. It was simply the shepherd and his sheep making the journey through the valley. And so he says the rod and the staff, the rod was used to protect the sheep, to chase off any predators. And the staff used to guide the sheep, to keep their feet steady as they walked the uneven terrain. And so David's message is, God has plans for you. He has somewhere he wants you to go. He has a better place in store, but to get there may involve walking through a few dark valleys. But don't be afraid, because as you go through the hard times, you go through the difficult seasons, know that your good shepherd is with you to protect you and to guide you, and take comfort from that as you face your fears and faith. It's actually a theme that resonates throughout the Bible. When Joshua is getting ready to go into battle in Jericho, he is told to be strong and courageous, not because he has a big, experienced army behind him, and not because the people of Jericho don't know how to fight, and not because the walls of Jericho are somehow structurally unsound and they'll collapse when you stomp loud enough. He is told to be strong and courageous. Why? The Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. It's okay that they're big. It's okay that it's scary. It's okay that the battle's coming. But you be bold and courageous, Joshua, for the shepherd will be with you. Face your fear with faith. We see the same thing in the New Testament, right? In the book of Acts, we encounter the disciples standing before the Sanhedrin. And they are told, if you don't stop preaching, we're going to do to you what we did to Jesus. We're going to beat you, we're going to imprison you, we might even kill you. And Peter and John stand and say, listen, we cannot stop speaking about what we have seen and heard. Is it because they were particularly brave people? Of course not. Just Just about 3 weeks earlier, 5 weeks earlier, they were running for their lives and hiding themselves in a locked up room. Is it because they're particularly smart and wise? No, that same chapter says they were plain, ordinary, uneducated men. They were simple folk. Where did their courage come from? At the very end of the Great Commission, when Jesus tells them to go and to preach the gospel, he ends by saying, "And surely I will be with you always, even until the end of the age." So the resounding message of Scripture from the life of David, from the life of Joshua, from the life of Peter and John, is when we find those hard times, when we find those areas where fear rears its head, we don't need to run away, we don't need to hide, we don't need to hunker down, we don't even need to fight. We need to trust in our shepherd, that he will lead us through to the other side. We face the thing that scares us with faith. So what's that look like tangibly? Practically, what does that mean for you and for me? Have you ever noticed that fear keeps us from doing what we know we ought to do? That we know what the Bible commands, we know what it says, and yet it is our fear that keeps us from being obedient. I could give you literally hundreds of examples, but I thought this morning I would stick to just one category. We'll talk about our interpersonal relationships. Have you ever noticed how fear keeps you from having the conversations you know you need to have? For example, you might need to confess some sin to someone, that you have hurt them in some way. You have sinned against them and against God, to use biblical language. And you might need to, if you're going to follow what the Bible says, it says if you have wronged someone, go to them and make it right. You might need to sit down with them and say, "Listen, I was hurt by this thing that you did, and I responded by A, B, and C, and I attacked your character, and I was unkind to you, and I am sorry for what I have done." But to do that is to make yourself vulnerable. What if I come to them and I confess and I apologize and they don't forgive me? What if they judge me and condemn me? What if they go tell everyone what I've done and then everyone judges and condemns me? What if no one ever looks at me the same? No, it's easier to keep the wall up. It's safer to keep the wall up, and our fear keeps us from being obedient. Or we might be on the other side of that conversation. We might need to offer forgiveness. One of the hardest conversations I've ever had, I sat down with a gentleman and said, "You probably don't even know how bad you hurt me." Because he was oblivious to everything. He just was like a bull in a china shop all the time. And I sat down with him and I said, "Listen, I have been mad at you for 5 years. I go to bed at night thinking how much I want to tell you what to do and where to go. Because you wounded me in a way that I don't let most people wound me. Because I don't let most people have that much power over my heart. And I just need you to know that in this moment I have decided I am no longer going to be angry with you." One of the hardest conversations I've ever had. Because what if he doesn't care? If I forgive him and let him back in, what if he hurts me again? What if he takes advantage of my vulnerability? No, it is far safer to leave the walls up. Some of you may need to confront someone. You may have someone in your life that you love that is headed down a destructive path. I've had some hard conversations. There's a lot of hatefulness being spread right now. I've had some hard conversations with some friends where I said, "Listen, if you're going to follow Jesus, you cannot talk like that. I don't care how much you disagree with the person. I don't care how angry you are. You cannot speak about other people that way and wear the name of Christ. You just can't. Let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is useful for building one another up." Those are miserable conversations, because what if they don't hear you? What if they just reject your friendship? What if they just go, "Well, fine, if you're going to treat me like that, I want nothing to do with you." And it cost me a friend, or several friends. But it was far easier and safer to just let them do whatever they want and I'll do whatever I want. That conversation is scary. Even though the Bible tells me to rescue my brothers from sin. Some of you need to share the gospel with someone. You've got a coworker or a friend who desperately needs to hear about who Jesus is, but you know if you start that conversation, they're going to have questions you cannot answer. And they might want nothing to do with you because you're one of those weird church folks. And it might cost you friendships. It might cost you prestige. I could go on down this list forever. But if we're honest, how many things are there that you know you're called to do? You know Christ wants you to do, and it is fear that keeps us from following. And the call of the 23rd Psalm is, let me face my fears with faith. Let me have those hard conversations. And if I get rejected, then I will be rejected in the presence of my shepherd. And if I fail, I will fail in the presence of my shepherd. And if I get hurt again, I will be hurt in the presence of my shepherd. And he will comfort me, and he will provide for me. I need fear no danger, for his rod and his staff, they will comfort me. So I would just challenge you. I don't know what it is for you, but I would challenge you to think of one thing this week that you know you're being called to do. You know that God has placed this opportunity in front of you, and for whatever reason, your fear has kept you from being obedient. Find the courage this week to face that fear with the faith you have in your shepherd. I'm a big believer, with kids especially, in helping them face tangible fear, so that when they get in situations where they're afraid to talk to their parents, they have learned that they can face their fears and come out the other side okay. So there's a list of probably at least 20 names that I have forced is too strong a word, coerced to jump off of this thing we call the blob at camp. Okay, the blob tower is this 15-foot wooden tower that you jump off of onto this long tube of air that floats in the water. And if a student has the silliness to mention to me early in the week that they are afraid of heights, I will do everything in my power that week to get them on that tower before we leave. Because there's something incredibly powerful about knowing I am afraid of this thing and this thing scares me, and yet I can do it anyway and come out the other side okay. Because there are going to be times when they're afraid of a job interview, or they're afraid of a conversation with a friend, or they're afraid of, and they need to know that that fear doesn't have to control them. And so there's a long list of students that are afraid of heights that have jumped off that tower with me floating in the water below them and my wife standing beside them in the tower. On that list, among my favorites, is my son, who at 3 years of age said to me, "Dad, can I jump off the block tower?" And like any rational, normal father, I'm like, "Sure, dude, get your swimsuit on, let's go." So this is my son at 3 years of age, halfway off the block tower. You're supposed to land on your backside. He was about 9 before he stopped face planting. But he stood on the edge of that tower for probably 15 minutes the first time. 15 feet does not seem like that tall until you're on the tower looking down at the water. And he kept doing this thing where he was looking back and forth. That's me in the water floating by the blob. And Candace is up on the tower with him. And he's looking back and forth from her to me, going, "I'm not sure this is a good idea." And one of the things we talked about that day, and one of the things we talked about every summer since when he's jumped off that tower, is just imagine all the things you will miss if you let fear control your life. Just imagine all the things you will miss out on if you let fear control your life. Imagine what would have happened if you were too afraid to ask out that pretty girl in high school, and all the years of marriage you would have missed. Imagine what would have happened if you were too scared to take the risk on that friendship, or on that new job opportunity, or on that new house that you wanted to purchase. Imagine all the things you would have missed if fear had ruled your life. But if you can find the courage, and in the case of my son, his courage was found in looking and seeing his father waiting below. Well, Dad said I can do it, so I can do it. Can you imagine what would happen in our church if, as the people of God, we stopped letting fear control us, and we instead looked into the eyes of our Father and said, "I will be obedient even when it scares me"? Can you imagine what happened to our community? How many more people would hear the good news of Jesus if we stopped being afraid to share it? How many broken relationships might be fixed if we stop being scared to have those conversations? How many ministry programs might happen if we stop being afraid of failing? How much more generous we could be if we stop being afraid of the economy? Can you imagine how much life we miss out on because of our fear? And can you imagine the difference we could make if every time that fear arose, we looked into the eyes of our shepherd and we found faith, and we faced our fears with faith? Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me.